This episode of the CUInsight Experience is brought to you by Humanidei. Humanidei helps credit unions build inclusive cultures that attract, develop, and retain talent. Welcome to episode 131. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and this show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement that make it so great. Today, I am having a conversation with Elissa McCarter-LaBorde. Elissa is the president and CEO of the World Council of Credit Unions. So let's jump right in. Elissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Randy. Great to be here. Yeah, I've been on the job about 6 months now.
It's amazing. And so we are actually recording this at CUNA GAC. So first time, I'm sure, for you to meet a lot of people. First time for all of us to see anybody in the last 2 years. So how has this experience been, I guess, getting to actually meet a lot of people face to face for the first time?
Well, you forget after 2 years how it feels like to meet people face to face. So I'd have to say it's been a good change.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's about time.
So I was so excited to talk to you about your career path and your journey and what brought you to credit unions and the World Council. How did you get started? Like, what brought you to this point? And I'll throw a follow-up question there for you, as well as, when was the first time you even heard what a credit union was, or like thought about a credit union? Because most of us didn't grow up going credit unions. I want to be in that space someday. So how about for you?
Well, a little bit of my story is I am new to the credit union world, but I have spent the last 20 years plus working on financial inclusion issues around how do you design financial services for low-income populations globally. So I've actually only worked in the international markets. I've never worked, I've worked in the U.S., but I've not actually focused on U.S. financial inclusion, which is, as we know, a really big problem that we still have yet to solve
Absolutely.
in this country. So I've, familiar with all the issues, haven't really worked in the credit union space, but have been really happy to see some of the synergies, a lot of really positive energy, certainly commitment, and passion for the credit union movement. Didn't know it was a movement until I joined, but really encouraging to see the kind of collaboration and I think relevance for where we are as a lot of disparate communities facing a lot of global challenges and a lot of work to be done, but I think a whole lot of potential in not only the credit union business model, kind of the power of local people's money, mobilizing member ownership. Those are all things that I believe in, but I'm still trying to dig into where can I have impact in this new role. So you asked me, how did I learn about credit unions? So funny enough, my dad was he joined the Air Force and then he went commercial and he flew for Delta Airlines for 30 plus years. So he was a credit union member of the Delta Community Credit Union.
There you go.
And opened my first account, I think when I was 16.
Right. Yeah.
Savings account. And I have been a credit union member ever since. So I like to joke that, my personal money stays with my credit union. When I got married, we have some joint accounts and, bank accounts, but my personal money,
it's been with Delta,
I keep with my credit union.
So, I appreciate your dad being a Delta pilot. Also, I'm a million miler. I'm looking over at my backpack over here. So with Delta. So it's awesome. How do you, with your work history and all the experience that you have, how do you see that playing into what you can do with WOCU and now the art kind of settling? Because from just doing a little bit of homework, your past is amazing and the work that you were doing. So I was really interested to find out also, how does your experience tie into what you can do now with credit unions around the world?
I think one of the best decisions I ever made was when I started my career. I kind of fell into, at the time, what was microfinance. I got out of school and I got a job offer. And my first position out of graduate school was in Yerevan, Armenia.
Oh, all right.
You might not know where that is on the map, but that's in the Caucasus and it's a former Soviet republic. And what I ended up doing my first 2 months on the job was literally being a debt collector, going from door to door and sitting in the living rooms of a lot of very poor women and understanding why they had been able to take a microcredit and not be able to pay it back. And how would I get $1 today and $1 tomorrow and try to basically rebuild what was a, very promising microcredit program, but had not been set up the right way. And so you learn firsthand how do you really understand how to put yourself in a customer's shoes? And in our context, right, how do you really understand the member? And that means looking at the gender distinctions of what members need, the age and the life cycle that they're in, and what kinds of not only financial tools and choices people have, but what are the surrounding community layers of support that a person needs. And I say that story because for me, that always is what boils down to where we make a difference. You know, in my several years of starting in microfinance and then financial inclusion, and in my last job trying to build a group of companies that was serving what we called the missing middle. So the small business owner that was kind of too small for the banks, but too big for many, microfinance specialized lenders. What we saw was this huge opportunity to really design services in a way that promote resilience and the kind of economic revitalization and reinvestment back into local communities that is what powers jobs and families. And so many communities, name the town, so many communities around the world. And what attracted me to credit unions is this idea that when you have a business model that actually prioritizes savings and building assets and pooling money and reinvesting that back into the same community.
The communities, yeah.
That is really powerful. And, coming out of a sector where I've always worked with an organization that had a social mission, that had a double bottom line, but I was very challenged in the last couple of years with the pandemic and the challenge of raising private equity, which was what I was doing, and trying to deploy it into very vulnerable markets, mostly in the Middle East was where I focused. I was pulled in so many directions of trying to, meet shareholder expectations and do what was right for the community, take risks for the community to design products in a way that actually met the needs of the more vulnerable members. All that to say that I think there is a huge opportunity for us to really, activate this cooperative business model in the face of, banking gone wrong in some cases, fintech that is exploding, gone astray in some cases. Absolutely. Where it's not always in the best interest of the low income consumer. And credit unions for me are a counterweight to banks gone wrong in some places. And I won't say everyone, right. But fintech's gone astray. I really feel like, we talk about financial health in the credit union industry, which I was happy to hear. I think we talk about the underserved. For me, a big challenge is there's a lot of people who are not well served. It's not only the underserved, but it's not well served by the financial sector. And that's what we've got to change.
That's pretty amazing. I have to ask, I'm looking at your pin. You have the U.S. flag and the Ukrainian flag. There's credit unions over in the Ukraine right now. So how, and this is, I guess, a bigger question even than maybe Ukraine, but that's top of mind, I think, for all of us at this point in time. But it's got to be such an interesting thing when you're running an organization that has its, footprint all around the world. When something this is a new one, I think, for all of us, but, when something like this pops up, what is the role of WOCU and what is the role of, most of our listeners are from the U.S. credit union system, right? Like, what is our role to our brothers and sisters in the credit union movement or the cooperative movement and what can we do to help, I guess, is the final question, if we're feeling a little helpless. Putting you on the spot. Sorry, that wasn't on my list of questions, but...
Well, what's unfolding in Ukraine right now is the crisis at hand. And I'm proudly wearing my dual pin of the Ukrainian flag and the American flag because I met earlier today with the Ukrainian American colleagues who support the diaspora here. And I myself, the World Council of Credit Unions, we have a team in Ukraine. I've got staff who are there, who's still there in Kyiv and across the country. We had a project that was funded by the U.S. government, USAID, over the past 5 years that was supporting agricultural producers through 23 credit unions that we work with there. And we had to quickly, obviously, transition to, first and foremost, you focus on the safety and security of our staff and their families and our credit union partners and their members and, take stock. And I think nobody really saw this coming, even though we had the warnings. I mean, essentially the rules of engagement have been rewritten in Europe. And, what does that mean for us at credit unions? My background is in the international development industry. And I have friends and colleagues who have expertise who've built their careers around humanitarian relief and emergency relief. And I think what I spoke with our Ukrainian American colleagues today, and where I feel actually privileged to be at the World Council at this moment, is that we have a global movement of people that are passionately supporting this concept of people helping people. And we have 118 countries, 86,000 credit unions, serving 375 million members. I repeat those numbers because 118 countries, including Ukraine. And what you can do through the power of a people movement, the power of networks, to use that infrastructure and to try to help communities survive and rebuild is absolutely what we have to tap right now. So we opened within 48 hours of the conflict breaking out, we basically quickly pivoted and opened a webpage that allows people to donate to an emergency fund for supporting displaced Ukrainians.
We have raised that in the show notes for sure. So yeah.
So we are absolutely going to be there for our Ukrainian members and staff and supporters. And it's just a matter of looking at what we can do and how do we meet people's needs and make sure that credit unions are part of that support network to this crisis that is unfolding.
Yeah. Be ever changing, right? I mean, we'll see how it all goes. Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about credit unions. What has you most excited? Like right now, I want to go positive here. So what has you most excited as you look forward, whether it's with the work you'll be doing with WOCU or just credit unions in general or cooperative financial institutions all over the world, right?
What is most exciting for me and why I joined World Council is this massive footprint around the world, right? Yeah. I've said this a number of times to people, but it's just still worth repeating. I mean, think about it. From the data we have in 2020, so with membership growing, not growing as fast as it should, think about the 400 million touch points to members in 100 plus countries across the world and what you can do through the network effect, through digital platforms, by connecting people to people, by connecting ideas and young leaders that we're promoting, the kinds of ways that fintech and technology is disrupting banking, but it's also disrupting the way we address the pain points and break down the barriers of why people have not had good financial access in the past. And for me, the most exciting is, this is the last mile customer reach that credit unions have that are, some of the hardest places to do business, the hardest places to bring access to capital and resources and connectivity. You need that kind of footprint. You still need boots on the ground, even with, digital, touchless. So that combination of tech and touch and the boots on the ground and the footprint of credit unions is where I see so much potential to actually grow beyond the numbers we have now, because we absolutely need to grow faster and bigger. But that to me is an incredible opportunity, and it's a problem to solve, but it's a huge opportunity for us to meet.
So this year I've been asking the CEOs who've come on the podcast this idea of is there something they believe every credit union needs to be thinking about right now? And I would take that from a global perspective for you. And I love the fact that with your background in microfinance and, that development, is there something, oftentimes fresh eyes are a very good thing, right? Like to come in and say, kind of get past that. That's the way we've always done it. Is there something that you think, whether it's a U.S. credit union or a credit union across the pond, that everybody just needs to be thinking about today? You've mentioned fintech a few times.
Well, that's a big question because I guess the answer is, the technology's there. The mindset always has to keep up. And That is the hard nut to crack. And I guess what I would say is that you've got to be able to really listen. Listen to your members, listen to your staff, your younger staff. I mean, millennials, I've heard this a number of times, are hungry for and believe in this kind of business model, the kind of reinvention.
And they're not that young anymore.
And okay, so then you focus on the Gen Z and the millennials. But yeah, exactly. I think that, some people will say you just need to get out of the way. I don't think it's getting out of the way. I think it is, there's a new way of working that COVID has multiplied, where we work from anywhere. We work with multiple tools. We connect in a lot of different ways. I think people's voices and different ways of thinking and the diversity in the capital D sense of the word, where it's gender diversity, it's minorities, it's Black, brown, it's every possible different human perspective that enriches our ability to solve problems and tackle those big challenges. And that's the way to do it. I mean, this is the skill I'm not as good as I want to be at, but it's that kind of active listening all the time and the awareness of what you're not seeing that helps you solve problems and really think of what's possible.
Active listening is something I've tried to work on myself. It's not one of my strong suits, but when you are listening and you hear the problem, as a leader of an organization, and even drawing from your past, some of these things, they can seem monumental, overwhelming to try to solve a problem. Is there something, or do you have any hacks on, like, when you see something you want to fix, how do you start that process, or how do you take on that big project to try to change the world?
I don't have the magic bullet on that, but I can say that, I get the best brains in the room, whether that's a virtual room, and that's diverse brains.
Absolutely.
That's cross-generational brains to try to think about solving a problem from different angles. And that's kind of the way you crack it. I mean, you have these design sprint and human-centered design, and there's lots of ways people allow minds to break down an issue. For me, I need to sit on something for a while and hear a lot of different points of view and debate and collaborate. And then often the solution is sitting right in front of you. You just haven't been able to see it yet.
I love the diversity that you've brought up. I love that you've brought it up multiple times because it's so important. And the diversity of thought that comes from that as well is, it just works, so you need more than just one. It can't just be all about my thoughts. And I think it's been fun to watch leaders and hear some great leaders that have been on the podcast talk about that, where you started that, like, bring other smart people into the room, with different diverse thoughts. So that's cool. I heard this question at the end of last year when I was listening to another podcast, and I just thought it was fun. So I'll throw it out there to you. Has there been an investment that you made in your career that when you look back on it, you're like, wow, that's been hugely helpful? And the example that I've been giving, that was the Warren Buffett says it was a Dale Carnegie course early on, right? Like, so is there something that you think back on that you're like, that was very helpful or beneficial for my career?
I'm going to just say the first thing that came to mind, which is kind of funny, but maybe speaks to the kind of super hyper wired world that we're in. And my kids like to comment on it. So when I was in 5th grade, I took one of those homemakers courses, that they offered back in the day. This dates myself a little bit, but within the different things, they offered typing classes.
Yes.
Typing on the old typewriters.
I the electric typewriter I took my typing class on. It was not keyboarding yet, so yeah.
And I didn't appreciate it at the time, but, I had a unique ability to type very fast with little errors. And that gave me a lot of temp jobs that made me some of my early money.
Okay. Awesome.
And it has helped me manage the crazy schedule that we all have with firing off emails and drafting memos. And so, yeah, I'm a light speed typer that helps me get through my day. So, it's the basic of things, but I tell you, it's a life skill you got to know.
In this day and age, that is for sure. So I have a question about leadership teams. We often talk about culture, and when you're putting together your leadership team, is there something that you're looking for? Are there different characteristics that you're looking for? And I guess, what do you put into that decision-making process when you're filling something like, say, a person on your senior leadership team or a role? And is there something that turns like you off to a candidate or a person instantly? Like, or you're like, no, that's not it. On the flip side.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, if you're talking about your leadership team, the team of people that really is supposed to model the culture of the organization, then, I mean, it's a whole lot of things, right? You need a diverse leadership team that brings in different perspectives, that represents the kind of values that you want to have as an organization. I can say that some of the things I look for is more of I don't want to say a gut feeling, but I think people who are really smart, of high values, who have the kind of humility, and in our world, a real commitment to doing the right thing and being the right collaborator with others, especially at an executive level. I think all those things have to add up. So, there's a lot of, people fall into territory, and there's ego, and there's, usually brilliant expertise. But I think the kind of the secret sauce for me is the humble approach, and might I say kind of kindness in being human, and understanding one another and admitting faults and like figuring things out together. I think that's what I have appreciated in the leadership teams that I've had. You want people to have your back. You want people to call you out and hold you accountable. And you want people to just be kind to one another, because we're not always going to get it right.
Absolutely. So that leads me right into the other question I was looking forward to asking. How do you give feedback? Everything always doesn't go right. So if somebody is struggling with something as a leader, if there's maybe think about somebody who disappointed you or something, you don't have to throw out their names. How did you give feedback, and how did you turn that situation, or I guess coach it up for the better? Or any hacks? How about that?
Well, the hack is the old school approach to, the 1 minute manager. Do you remember that was that like 50 years ago? I still think that it's, you should give feedback, soon after it happens, start with something positive, give people specific things on, what they needed to work on, be transparent about it, and ultimately be okay with, I think this is the hardest thing is, I don't like confrontation. And I think giving and receiving feedback are equally hard. But if you've built the relationship where you can frequently communicate and be transparent, people know where you're coming from, I think it makes it a whole lot easier.
So one of the things you mentioned in the last question was that idea of people that will kind of take you to task also, like on your leadership team. How do you create that space where people feel safe to be able to come to you and be like, I don't know about that one, boss, like as the CEO?
I think you have to ask for it. I think there is, I've worked in a lot of different cultures where hierarchy is really important, and it's sometimes impossible, because if you're at a CEO level, everybody will tell you this, it can be lonely, mainly because sometimes people will just take what you say and not question it. And, that's the boss. So I think that unless you actually seek out the feedback and say, no, I really want you to tell me, I think you can often find yourself in a vacuum where people don't want to say something that they might be thinking. So I think a lot of it is just the simple question of creating a comfortable environment where you're okay taking criticism, and when you get it, to react in a way that it makes people feel, to model behavior that will encourage future feedback. I don't have a better solution, but I guess there's an art to it. But I think you got to really seek it out and be open to it.
When you look at leadership, is there traits that you think make a good leader? I thought about what we were just saying about going to be lonely at the top or the CEO position. I had friends who were surprised when they became CEOs, how much their previous CEO had shielded them from a lot of the day-to-day of the board. So it was like you have the board above you, basically maybe 10 bosses or however many, and then you have your whole team. And you're kind of there. And it's got me thinking over the years about like, what is it that makes that person who can be a good CEO and a good leader. And when you're managing up again and you see team members, because being a leader is different than being like an A-type personality who just gets things done, and goes the route alone. Is there something you look for when you look for a strong leader, or something in the leaders that you've worked for, even that you're like, that made that person a great leader?
Oh, I hate these questions about leadership. I know I'm partly kidding, only partly kidding. These are great questions because I can only speak from the experience I've had. And it is absolutely true that I think it comes with the job that you have to shield your team to a certain extent from politics and things, because that's the way that's part of your job, right? Because you want your team to be motivated and focused on the task at hand and not be bogged down with some of the things that maybe are the less fun parts of the job. I can say that I've generally had very good experiences, both managing up and managing a team. And, I've certainly made mistakes, and I've had some difficult personalities and conflicts to smooth over. But I think ultimately, maybe this is what makes the difference, and why I've stayed in industries and in organizations that are about purpose, is that when you can always bring it back to the ultimate purpose, which is, social mission, greater good. I mean, there's a whole range of reasons why people work for nonprofits or they work for credit unions. I think at the end of the day, the kind of people you work with, even when there's difficult personalities in politics, is that ultimately we're rowing in the same direction. And the intent is to that same purpose. And that's where I go back to, kind of kindness. And, I think if you put yourself in somebody else's shoes and, avoid the tendency to get prickly, or I think that that's ultimately what wins over some of these challenges of managing boards and protecting your team and dealing with the things that go with the job.
Just a couple more questions on leadership. Something, and I've even noticed it in our own company when we grew, was sometimes it's maybe unintentionally the risk appetite decreases. So you're 6 months into a position at Woku. You mentioned earlier the breadth of, the depth of how many members are out there around the world and how many credit unions there are, but it's still not enough, right? So how do you, I guess, manage risk, take risk to make sure that you're still moving, let's say, fast and forward, and as you're running an organization that's been around for quite some time?
Well, that's the golden question. Right. I think that, I don't know how you rank my risk tolerance or risk taking on a scale and what that scale looks like. I guess what I can say is that while I'm still new, 6 months on the job, I think there's an opportunity to make a big splash and to take the risks and be ignorant to a certain extent from all the reasons why somebody else didn't do it or couldn't do it or it's not possible. So I think as long as I can keep that kind of fresh look and focus on the possible, ultimately, you can get there. What I've found, and it's funny, just yesterday, a couple of my board members, I take the opportunity that if something doesn't sit right, or I think that there's a different way to look at it, I'll say it. And there's a risk in speaking out, because maybe that's not the culture, or that's, but while I'm new and I can, play that I didn't know any better, I had a couple of my board members say, well, before, don't worry, we'll pull you back before you might get electrified. And I thought, okay, thank you. Make sure you pull me back before that starts. But otherwise, I think, you got to keep, if you're coming in as an outsider and you're new, I think I think that's what my board has brought me in to do. Absolutely. I think they're part of why they do that is to get that fresh perspective and to shake things up. And if you can't do that, then to a certain extent, you've not lived up to the expectation of why you were hired. And
why they brought you in. I remember when you were hired, speaking to a couple of the board members, and they were very excited about what they were hoping you were bringing to the table, right? So that's good stuff there. Another question that I was really interested to ask you, we all talked about remote work, a ton and all of that, but Woku's always had people all over the world. Obviously, in the business and the industries that you've worked in the past, people have been all over the place. What does it look like for that next generation of a credit union employee to work for a credit union, whether it's here in the United States or anywhere in the world? How do we attract that? It really had me thinking, I'm like, how do we attract that amazing young talent? What does the job look like in credit unions? Because it doesn't seem to me, at least, it looks like it's sitting in a branch anymore.
Well, it's definitely not sitting in a branch, pushing paper and moving very slow. I think that those days are over. The way I can answer this is certainly technology has revolutionized the way that we can do work. And, for parents, people like myself that have children that have always had this really big struggle of trying to balance all these things, the amount of flexibility of being able to get your work done, across a time, with the flexibility you need to be where you are, to meet your family obligations, to get your work done, to ultimately focus on the work and the productivity of the work and not the checking in and out of an office or a branch or the clocking in, clocking out. I think that has opened up a new world of possibilities that we're never going back, right? I think that the world of work is going to be hybrid, where you ultimately adapt yourself to how can you be the best for your member and meet your members where they are, which in some cases is rural areas that are not so digital. But that gradually is changing. It's changing really, really rapidly. I think there's an expectation by the next generations who are digital natives. I mean, even in far off countries where I have worked, with smartphones and connectivity and the web and TikTok, these different platforms, they're here to stay, maybe not in their current version, but in a future version. So I think this is why, going back to my earlier point, we got to listen to the needs and the ideas of the next generation. And not to say that there's a lot of wisdom in those who have been around the industry for a long time, who have seen a lot, who have the ability to look across time, because I think we rush into things sometimes. I think that taking the long view as well as an acknowledgement that we have to be adaptable, like the world is changing so fast. That's a combination, I think, that gives a lot of room for a lot of different kinds of people who can work together under these really powerful cooperative principles, which are about, collaboration among cooperatives and reinvesting back in our communities and people helping people. I think that speaks across generations and across technologies, but we have to get on it.
Yeah, absolutely. The technology thing is so interesting to me because before the pandemic, and I can't wait to get back out there doing it, but I spent some time in Kenya and I spent some time in Indonesia, and I was blown away by how much I thought from a technology standpoint, in the payments industry and things of that nature, they were well ahead of where we are. We're still using legacy type stuff that is just silly. So that always to me was very exciting to see how technology can actually help lift others. You don't need a branch when you talk about the rural or underserved or, so I don't know. For me, I find it exciting. It's just a question of how it gets out there. And so it's cool. Often being a leader of an organization and talking to CEOs, the job can consume, often to the detriment of personal relationships. Any hacks that you've picked up along the way to kind of create that balance where you still can run a global organization and still be there at home too?
Well, I have 3 kids. Their ages are 6, 9, and 13. So I am in the throes of elementary school, middle school, and I can say that my kids are the ones that keep me very grounded because, there's no mercy. They will call me out on what I'm doing wrong. And every day I am just thankful. And so I don't think it takes much more than that.
That's just they bring you back. Was there a piece of advice you received in your career that you kind of go back to?
When I decided to take this job, I wasn't looking for the job. The job found me. But when I decided to take the job and make the jump, my former boss was incredibly gracious, unhappy, but gracious. Yeah. And told me that, coming in as a new CEO, there's a bunch of books about 90 days and everybody wants to give you advice. Yeah. And, his advice to me was don't take any of the advice. So I can't say that I didn't listen. But I think that probably the best advice is, you find your own path and a lot of times you follow your gut. And I hate when people say that because sometimes it's hard to know what that is. But I think that ultimately you can belabor decisions and you can struggle to figure out. And I think at the end of the day, you find your way.
What's the greatest album of all time?
gosh, I'm terrible at these things. I don't know if I can name an album. Let me tell you an experience.
Yes, I love it.
That on my birthday, many years ago when I was in school, a friend of mine got me tickets to hear Yo-Yo Ma play the cello suites, the Bach cello suites in the National Cathedral here in Washington, D.C.
Sounds pretty amazing.
And I have to say that took the cake of kind of the greatest of all time. And there was really nothing more powerful.
He has a free audio book on Audible right now. That's like he tells his life story and then plays song and music in between the stories. I actually listened to it on the plane a few times. So yeah, it's glorious. Is there something you're currently reading, or is there that book that you think everyone should read?
What I am currently reading, which I would highly recommend, is The Island of Women, which is by Lisa C. It's set in South Korea on the island of Jeju.
Okay.
And it basically describes what was one of the first and kind of only still existing matriarchal societies on the island, where women sea divers, these were the women who used to dive for shells and octopus, no equipment. Right. They basically did free diving.
They were free diving, yeah.
But they were the breadwinners of the family, and it tracks, all the history of, the wars, disruptions across Korea. But it's an excellent read. It's fascinating because it's such a different culture. Very well, well written, insightful. And I'm reading it because our next board meeting is supposed to be in Seoul, Korea. Yeah. One of our largest credit union systems is in Korea. And so this is a book that actually my mother recommended that I read, and is fascinating from a cultural standpoint. So
I am intrigued. That's for sure. My favorite question. When you hear the word success, who's the first person that comes to mind and why?
The first thing that came to my mind, and I haven't, I don't know, there's lots of ways to define that, but Michelle Obama.
Yeah.
Came to my mind only because, for many reasons, but I think that the kind of role you play on that stage where your spouse becomes the president of the United States, and you can, gracefully and powerfully play the role of the spouse, the wife, the first lady, and then ultimately transition that into the kind of organization that she's founded, supporting nutrition of kids, and just, the popularity she has for the right reasons is amazing. It's a balance of kind of taking a back seat to somebody else's career when you yourself are a very powerful force of nature, and then just following, some of the things she has said and done is something that I find really inspiring.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And her book's amazing too. So, well, there you go. That is it. Thank you so much for being on the show and taking your time out of your GAC today. Thank you so much. We will link to everything that we talked about today in the show notes. Thank you again, Elissa, for being here today. This was amazing. I can't wait to know you even more. A few things before we go. Make sure to check out Humanidei in the show notes also. I am grateful for their support of the podcast and allowing me to have this much fun doing what I do. Please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We're on them all. And while you're there, we sure would appreciate a 5-star review if you think we're worth it. It helps with the visibility of the show. And if you're looking for a book recommendation, maybe one that was mentioned by one of the guests on the show recently, a quick Google of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and you can have your next read on its way from Amazon. Last and certainly not least, I want to thank all of you for listening today. Y'all rock, and I appreciate all the kind words that come out about the show. The guests are amazing, and hearing from all of you is so great. So be well, friends. I hope to see you all soon too.